All right, Abby, see the screen?
Yes, sir. I have that pulled up on my computer too.
Okay. Go ahead and just read through the rationale with the delegates, and then you can go from there.
Okay. You just want me to start reading where it says, please detail the recommended action?
Yes, ma'am. That'll be.
Okay. Restrict running off the floor to officer candidates who went through the nominating committee and who scored in the top 75%. To ensure that only the highest quality candidates are awarded the state office or given the opportunity to run off the floor. Having the highest quality candidates become state officers would benefit student memberships by having those state officers recruit and retain membership through leadership camp, chapter visits, chapter banquets, state convention, and officer training. Nominating committee is a process used to identify the highest quality candidates from state officer applicants. Nominating committee's recommendations should indicate what is best for our state association.
So Abby, go ahead and open up the floor to the delegates for some conversation.
This delegate session is open for discussion.
Remember, guys and girls, there's no bad ideas. This was proposed by a chapter because they feel it's something that our state needs to address. It's okay if you just want to unmute yourself and talk right now, or if you want to type it in the chat. Both are effective. And yeah, let me pull up the information that was gathered for the committee too, so that you can see it.
Sure.
To give you some background on this information, the area officers who created the committee were allowed to ask questions for research. So they asked 3 questions. The first was how many states utilize the NOMCOM report to elect their state officers. The second question was about Louisiana. The third was about Louisiana. So if you go through each of them, I was able to get information from all of the southern region states, the one that didn't respond. And you can see what they reported back. Louisiana and Mississippi have similar processes where candidates can run off of the floor, even if they're not nominated. From what the state advisor in Mississippi told me, the candidate has to go all the way through NOMCOM. I'm not sure if you can continue to run, but she just said you have to go through the process. Florida and Georgia use a hybrid process. In Georgia, the state has 3. The nominating committee selects 4 candidates from each region, so they get 12 candidates narrowed down from however many they start with. And there's 8 state offices. Those 12 candidates run for those 8 positions, and they're elected by popular vote. No other candidates can run. In Florida, there's a screen that will select 2 per area. I don't know how, well, he said total of 14, so they must have 6, because 2 for president. So they have 6 areas. They select 2 candidates per area, and then they also select 2 for president, for 14 candidates. Those candidates campaign, and then they're elected into their offices at state convention. So it's kind of a hybrid process of ours and Georgia's. The other states, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee, the NOMCOM report is final. Whatever the committee chooses, those are the state officers. I don't know outside of the southern region, specifically what states do. We didn't have time to reach out to all 50, but this gives you a snapshot. And then specific to the question was, have we always allowed students to run off the floor? I asked a past executive secretary who was teaching ag in the late 70s. He said, at least that far back, we've been allowing candidates to run off of the floor. He didn't know beyond that if there was ever a difference prior to that. And I don't have any way of knowing way back in the day if the practice was the same. So it's at least been around since the 70s. And then the other question was, how many officers have been elected off the floor in Louisiana? I can go back about 15 years with accuracy and figure out each year how many officers were elected off the floor. Going before that, we don't keep that record, or we didn't keep that record in our office up until the past years. And then you're trying to get people to remember 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. Once I went back earlier than 2005, the past state officers couldn't remember beyond that. So we've got accurate data for the past 15 years. You can see that in those 15 years, how many do we have? 1, 2, 4, 5 of the 15 years where the entire NomCom's choice was elected. So those are the questions that the area officers asked us to research.
Mr. Cade, I don't know if you've seen, but Miss Amy asked if you could screen share what is outlined in our Constitution regarding officer election.
Yeah, I can pull that up also. Let me go to it. It's on our website. Give me just 1 second to pull it. If you ever want to look for it, well, let me just do this so you can see it. You can follow along with me. So if you go to our website, click on Association, click on About Us, and then scroll down, you'll see our state constitution. Is the Constitution on the screen? Can you see it? Yeah, okay.
Sir.
So when you read our state constitution, it's in a few pieces where it talks about officer election. The first part, let me get to it. The first part talks about officers. You see, these are the officers that we elect every year. So it talks about the 10 student officers, the state advisor, the executive secretary, the area advisors. And it says that they get elected at convention. They hold their offices for 1 year or until their successors are elected. It talks about the executive board, the House of Delegates. If you scroll down farther, you go to the bylaws. It talks about the duties of each officer. If you keep scrolling through the bylaws, you see committee. This is where you start learning about the election process. So here we see the nominating committee is one of our standing committees. So we have to have a NomCom every year per our constitution. It's one of 3 standing committees we have. Scroll down again, Article 4 of the bylaws talks about the procedure for electing state officers. So the nominating committee is spelled out. The Constitution says who makes up the NomCom. So 2 members from each area, 1 ag business representative from each area, and 1 past state officer. There was a provision passed several years ago that if no one can be found from a certain district or from a certain district to serve on the NomCom, it becomes at large area. If you can't find one from the area, it becomes at large state. That rarely happens. Normally, we're able to find it. Back when I was a student, Miss Green probably remembers this, nominating committee was much bigger. We used to have, what was it, Miss Amy, 15 people? I think it was like, shoot, it was a lot.
It was like 14.
It's very intimidating to walk in the NomCom room.
I believe it used to be 1 member from each district, and we have 15 districts.
Yes,
and then,
that was it, Mr. Cade.
And then it got added 4 adults. So at one point, we had 19 members of the state nominating committee. That got cut down, I think, in 2009, somewhere before then, so that now we're at 8 students, adults, 1 past state officer. It gives a provision that the executive board can prevent a student from running for state office under certain circumstances. That's at the discretion of the committee. So as an example, if there was a student who is running for state office, was convicted of a crime, the board does not have to allow them to run. If they get expelled from school running for state office, the board can prevent them from running. And then it also talks about the state officer commitment form and that an officer can be removed from office. So when you get to section C, this is where you start talking about what qualifies a candidate to run for state office. So they have to have the state degree. They have to have They can either be at the end of their junior year of high school, college, or starting their sophomore year of college. That was changed several years back also to give one more year of eligibility. Only run twice within that 3-year period. They have to submit their application, and it has to be approved by the chapter advisor. That's it. There is nothing else that references running for state office in Louisiana. So we know what qualifies a candidate. We know what makes up the nominating committee. We know that we have to have a nominating committee. There is no other guidance beyond that. All other procedures regarding election follows Robert's Rules of Order, because our Constitution says that Robert's Rules of Order governs all of our meetings, and nominations and elections are spelled out in Robert's. Robert's Rules of Order says that you can be more restrictive than what's in Robert's Rules of Order if your Constitution or your bylaws specify that. So right now, the current procedure we follow is based on our Constitution and the most current version of Robert's Rules of Order. Is there anything else you would like for me to clarify for you? And if everyone can see, some of the delegates are using the chat. Again, this is open for discussion amongst y'all. You've been charged to kind of figure out where you want to go with this.
South Lafouche said, so the question is if we think they should be allowed to run off the floor, and yes, that's the basis of the question. If we're going to allow for future years for people to run off the floor, or if nominating committee's choice will be the final answer to who our state officers will be.
Lake, and that's you from Denham Springs? If you want to talk, you can just unmute yourself and talk. It's pretty informal right now.
Okay, I couldn't tell. They said one thing, and
You're good.
I like that we have a nominating committee. I like how it's ran, but I do think that people should still be able to run off the floor because it still needs to have some of the student input. I know we do still have they said the previous state officer and people from the different districts, but I think that the delegates should be able to run people off the floor so that the students have more of an input, not just the nominating committee, since it is a student-led organization.
And just to help you also, if you go back to the rationale from the chapter that proposed this issue, they didn't say completely eliminate running off the floor. That was not the rationale. The rationale was to restrict running off the floor to candidates who went to non-com and scored 25% of non-com. So by that interpretation, they're saying the bottom 25% of scoring would be ineligible, according to their rationale.
Mr. Lejeune.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, as a area officer, I don't know. Are we allowed to like voice our opinions on the matter or no?
Since you are currently serving as a state officer, you have to recuse yourself from this one.
Okay.
Just keep taking notes. Same
Yes,
thing
sir.
with you, Elizabeth.
Yes, sir.
Everyone else is more than welcome to speak.
So I personally agree with the rationale. I think that if you go through nominating committee, it's a very rigorous process. And I think that it's definitely a committee full of people who know like what a person should be as a state officer. So if you score in the lower 25%, then maybe you weren't best for that position at that time. So me personally, I do agree with the rationale that the top 75% should be able to run off the floor, but nominating committee's choice is what's best, basically.
Mr. Lejeune, since I'm not a state officer, could I voice my opinions as well?
Yes.
I think that since the nominating committee has seen these state officer candidates go through the process and have figured out what they are capable of doing as potential state officers, they are more capable of deciding who we should pick to run our state instead of letting the delegates choose anyone in the bottom 25%, being that the nominating committee, who is trained to choose our state officers, figured that they were not as capable as the ones in the upper 75%. So I agree with their rationale.
I mean, I agree because I feel like if you get into the lower 25 percentile, they're not going to be as qualified as the upper 75 and may not give off as much information as the other ones.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And if you think about it, when you run off the floor, you're meant to give a 60-second speech. And you're allowed preparation for that speech. So sometimes you can prepare more, prepare less, but maybe that voice doesn't exactly represent how much you know about FFA and how qualified you are to become a state officer. So yeah, nominating committee's choice. They go through the process and they see how much they know about FFA, if they're qualified enough to become a state officer. That a 60-second speech doesn't always show that.
Again, make sure you monitor the chat because some of the delegates are putting their thoughts there also.
Okay, so South Lafourche 2 just said, I agree with what Mississippi does by allowing the candidates to run off the floor as long as they make it through all rounds of nominating committee. And I also think that they need to be up in the top 75%. So would anyone like to add to that or speak on behalf of what they have to say?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Going through all rounds of nominating committee is very important. I definitely agree with that.
To give you some more background, the nominating committee uses the national FFA officer competencies to score candidates through the committee. You can get a score on each competency from 0 to 5. And the competencies cover behavioral things. They cover actions that officers should be prepared to do if they get elected. And so in each round, depending on the round, certain competencies are scored. So for example, if it's a personal interview round where the candidate is answering just questions to the whole panel, they're going to be scoring on content. They score on appearance, body language, tone, how genuine are they, sincerity, those sorts of things. If the round is a workshop facilitation round, then they're going to be scored on organization, teamwork, ability to facilitate and present. So the competencies change depending on the type of round that's being scored, but every candidate is scored 0 through 5 by every committee member. So all 13 committee members score every candidate, with the exception of during a round robin, They may be scoring in groups, but regardless, it's an average score that's calculated from those competencies. So every round does have a numerical score that follows the candidate through the whole process.
Going based off what Mr. Lejeune said, that's being that NomCom gets to see these competencies through the through the state candidates. I believe that since they are seeing this and the delegates who are voting off the members that are running off the floor, they don't get to see all of that. They just get to go based off of a 60-second speech like someone else has said. And that doesn't show them how well prepared and ready they are to be a state officer.
So somebody in the lower 25% is going to have a much, I guess, drastic speaking skills, I would say, like speaking to a large group of people, because then a 75% person. So I feel like even if they did go up against each other, talking to the delegates or talking to whoever's voting, it would show, I feel like it would be a little bit more obvious which one's in the 25% and which one was the higher candidate.
So I see where you're coming from with that, but being that, like someone had said before, they do have time to prepare for these speeches that they're going to give on stage in front of the delegates. They have time to prepare ahead of time, so they have time to make it look like they could have scored in this top 75%, and we wouldn't know because of how much preparation and time they have put into their speeches, making them look perfect.
Some people are just really good at talking, and like when they talk, they make themselves sound a lot better than what they actually are. And if you go through the whole process, everyone in that committee sees what you actually do, not just something prepared, like ready to go put out there for like kind of a show.
Yeah, definitely. And another point is that national officers are the NomCom's choice. That's the NomCom selection. So all the national officers are the ones that the nominating committee chose.
Do we know, just out of curiosity, do we know how many of the past officers that were ran off the floor, do we know what percentile they were in, or like this is just plain out of curiosity? Do we know if they were in the lower 25% or if they were in the higher ones?
There was a document that it wasn't saying like the lower 25 or the top 75, you know what I mean? But there was a document that said how many people ran off the floor in past years and got a state office. So like last year, there were 2 people who ran off the floor and got a state office. So we don't have the percentages, but we do have the number of people who ran and were successful when running off the floor. And if you'd like to see that, Mr. Lejeune could pull it up on the share screen thing if you want.
No, I saw it. I had looked at it. I just didn't know if they knew what percentile they had fallen in, because within me being an FFA, or like for the past years of me being in it, I've never seen a bad state officer. So I wasn't sure if they had ran off the floor and they were in the lower 25% and somehow they made it work, or if they were all in the upper 75%. Because I feel like if somebody's in the upper 75%, they would be more confident in running off the floor.
Yeah, something like that would definitely be helpful to see, like where the running off the floor, where they like came from, like what rounds they went through and what they didn't go through, you know what I mean?
And do you think we should keep in mind that I know state convention looks a lot different this year because it's all going to be virtual, and I know through Sadie and I's our experience, we prepared our videos before and sent them in, but at a typical state convention, it would be somebody running off the floor right after the nominating committee is chosen and read aloud. So everyone in the auditorium would hear it at that point, and you would go directly into saying your speech. So a lot of times nerves and the adrenaline rush just from being in that position has a lot of an effect of how you speak and how well you speak. So just keep that in mind too as you're thinking about your decision and how you think we should play it out in future years.
I've got a couple of clarifications for you. I've got to be careful, just in full disclosure, I've got to be careful with this topic just because of my job and having to work with state officers. We don't want to, clearly we're not going to call anybody out or anything to that regard. To Lakin's question about, do we know if there have ever been state officers who would have been in the bottom 25% from election? I see every year the list of candidates from top to bottom numerically. I don't know percentage wise, but I do know that in years past, because in this job, and I've also served as a consultant on nominating committee before I was executive secretary, there have been candidates who've been elected who were definitely in the bottom two or three of the candidates who ran. Now, from a percentage of scores, I don't know where that would have fallen because we didn't calculate that number. But just based on where they fell in the lineup, yes, there have been some who've been elected off the floor who were farther towards the bottom of the numerical score. Something else that you're going to need to consider when you're talking about candidates being in the top 75%. We've had years, it's been a while since this has happened, but we've had years where we've only had 9 or 10 candidates run in total. So you need to consider what would the provision be if we were to go to a system where you have to be in the top 75% to be eligible to be elected. What happens if we have 9 candidates and only half of them end up in the top 75% of scores? I mean, that's hard to imagine, but it is possible. So just keep that in mind. I know this is a lot to try to figure out. Keep that in mind as your discussion continues.
Something else to keep in mind is whenever national officers run off or go into run, if they do not go through the entire election process, they cannot run off the floor at all.
And I see Miss Amy said in the chat, what steps will be necessary to change the procedure to remove or like to change, you know, the procedure to the new rationale that the chapter posed. So I guess we could move into that discussion of how that would be possible, how we would do that.
Well, just to answer that question, it's going to require a change to our state constitution. So whatever this committee decides and whatever is voted on this coming Tuesday during the statewide delegate meeting, any changes to this procedure, it would require a change to the constitution or the bylaws, because currently they don't specify a certain way, if that makes sense. So if we were to advance something that was to try to put a restriction, you're talking about it wouldn't come up again for final vote until the 2021 state convention, because it's got to go through the amendment process. Abby, just as advice from what the past 2 committees have done, probably at this point, let me pull up the document. You'll need to start kind of getting your mind around where the committee is wanting to go. Let's start putting some ideas down on paper. And then we'll start formulating the report. And keep in mind too, just as a reminder, this committee is not compelled to recommend some major change. If you feel the current system as a committee, if you feel the current system is good the way it is, you can recommend no change. You can recommend a different kind of change from what the rationale of the purpose was. Remember, right now, there is no motion on the floor. You're just being asked to discuss whether or not we should make a change to the state officer election process, and this one chapter is proposing 75%. But the delegates have latitude to alter that however you see fit based on your conversation. The only thing you can't do right now is you can't start discussing something that's not related to state officer elections.
So that being said, I do like the way that we do things now because, like I said earlier, I've never seen a bad state officer. And so, and there could have been some, and I just never even realized it, but FFA is also about learning. So I do feel that if someone was in the lower 25%, whether they had a bad day with the nom-com committee, not bad with them, but were just out of it and didn't give their full potential, I feel like being a state officer, going through their training, they can learn to be the state officer they need to be for our state, which is why I don't really feel like we need to change the system that we have now.
Would anyone like to add to that or speak on behalf of what she said?
I feel like as long as the committee is like sees that you're willing to put in the work, I think it'll be fine. Because if you're in the lower, you're gonna learn as you go. But if you don't want to put in work and learn, then that's gonna be the problem. But as far as I've seen, I've never seen a bad state officer either. So I completely agree.
Right, and people who want to run for state office have most likely either held an area office or a chapter office, or they've done something actively within their FFA chapter community area. They're not just going to wake up one day and say, oh, I think I'll run for state office. Now, some might, I'm not going to put it past, but I'm just saying it takes a lot of thought and it takes a lot of like courage to even run and go up against so many people in a nominating committee judging you constantly.
So we know some of y'all think it's good the way it is. Does anyone have any thoughts or something they'd like to say about how we could change it? Or does everybody think it's good the way it is?
I just want to let everyone know, no idea is a bad idea. So if you're thinking of saying something and you're just a little nervous or you don't know what to say, the best thing to do is just talk about it. And no one here is going to judge you. So if you want to say something, go on ahead, because I can promise you I've said some pretty dumb things and no one has ever judged me for it. So if you want to just say something, get it off your chest about the issue, then don't feel judged, because no one is judging you and no idea is a bad idea.
And if you don't want to say it out loud, you can always put your thoughts in the chat room.
I don't know a lot about the whole system, but from what I see, a lot of the people who I know who've become state officers and stuff like that have been really passionate and love what they do. And they said that the process, it may be hard and nerve-wracking, but it's really well worth it. So I think that if people have that kind of attitude, that I think it should stay the same.
And like going off what Mr. Cade said, the chapter just recommended the top 75%. It could be changed to like what Mississippi does, allowing candidates to run off the floor as long as they make it through all rounds of nominating committee. You know, so I mean, If you have any thoughts about that, you can definitely share them.
Yeah, so to clarify, we don't have to completely knock out running off the floor. It would just be the bottom 25%. You would still have 75% of candidates that would be able to run off the floor. If you're for the process, we could make that slight change to accommodate what this chapter has appealed for.
From what I gather for the last few speakers, I've heard people saying that they like the way it is, and people that want to run for state office are going to do what they have to do it. And if they want to run off the floor, I say they at least have to go through all the rounds of nominating committee that shows that they are dedicated to trying to be a state officer. And even if they score in the bottom 25%, those candidates should get a chance to run off the floor, being that they showed how dedicated they are by completing the entire nominating process.
Right, because I think that anyone that's willing to run off the floor, especially against a non-com's choice, and they know they weren't the choice, I still think that takes a lot to be able to get up in front of everyone and talk why you think you'd be a good candidate as well.
Okay, so I have a question, and if y'all can't answer it, it's okay. But right now, when you run off the floor, do you have to go through everything, or do you just go through parts of it?
Let me give you some background on that one. So currently the nominating committee has latitude in where they want to make a cut. Usually it depends on the number of candidates running. Normally, if there's more than 15 candidates, they probably will make a cut at some point. That also depends on the number of candidates per area. If there's only one candidate per area, they're going to go all the way through because that candidate's going to end up probably being nominated for their area VP spot. So it depends on the number. Once you start getting to more than 15, because the later rounds of NomCom are facilitation and advocacy, those rounds take longer and they're more in depth. And so when you have candidates who, let's just call them the easier rounds through like the personal interview rounds, the writing rounds, if they're struggling dramatically in those first rounds, it'll be reflected in the scores. And so they're probably not going to make the cut once the committee moves on. But under our current system, even if you were cut, you're still allowed to be nominated off of the floor and run for state office. On the national level, to give you perspective, it's not necessarily comparable to ours, but on the national level, the cut is 50% of the region. So after the second day of NomCom, which is about halfway through, they'll cut 50% of the candidates that are below, the bottom 50% from each region get cut. That's the procedure that's followed there. Someone just asked me a question, clarify what the rule is now. Who can run off of the floor? Any candidate who's qualified to run for state office and who goes through the process is qualified to run off the floor.
So right now, they don't have to go through the entire nominating committee. They just had to go through some of it to be able to run off the floor?
Correct. Even if you're cut, we still allow you to run if you get nominated. And again, that's because there's no clarification in our Constitution that says that you have to go through the whole thing. It just says if you have your state degree, if you're in the right grade, and if you start with the committee. It doesn't say that if you're cut, you can't run.
So with that new information, is there anybody that has maybe a different opinion on what they had said previously, or what they think we should do? Staffelfish said, I do think you should have to go through the whole process in order to run off the floor.
Does anyone agree with selfish too, and would like to say why they do.
I agree, because if you're going through the nominating committee process and you get cut, the nominating committee must have had a reason to cut you, and they feel strongly that you would not be the best fit for running our state association at that time. So if you're cut, you shouldn't be allowed to run off the floor and then possibly get a spot over someone they thought had a really good chance and was going to be a really good state officer for our state association.
South Lafourche said, I agree with that because you were cut for a reason.
For those of you who are favoring this option 2 that y'all are considering, you are going to have to come up with a consideration of kind of the scenario I told you about earlier. What if we only have 10 candidates, or we have less than 10 candidates? I mean, I guess in that case, would you just say that the nom-com is not allowed to cut anyone in that regard? If I guess my point is, if you're going to favor option 2, you're probably going to have to come up with some idea of who can the committee cut, or how many can they cut, so that you avoid a situation where you cut candidates and you can't even fill the team.
I guess that kind of cues me for another question. How, on average, how many people are how many people start, and then how many people are left once they've gone through all the nom-com rounds? I know it probably changes every year, but how many instances have we had where they haven't been able to fill the team, or they've had a lot of people left over that are able to run off the floor if they were to be going through all nom-com rounds? Since
Ms. Dodd has been facilitating the nom-com process, for those of you who don't know, Ms. Dodd is a past state president from Louisiana. She also was our most recent national nominating committee member from Louisiana. She served on the national nom-com 5 years ago or so. Their general rule is that if there's 15 candidates or less, they won't make a cut. Once you get over 15, again, because of time constraints and being able to do facilitation effectively towards the back end of the committee, that's when they'll start considering cuts. But again, if there's only one candidate from an area, even if there's 2 candidates from an area, they're not going to cut either of those, because then you're pretty much guaranteed who's going to be a state officer if there's only one candidate left from an area, if that makes sense.
So, Mr. K, just a question. If the committee is more towards option 2, would we be able to look at the guidelines that National FFA has written in their constitution so that we could base ours off of that? With the cutting and how many candidates there must be from each area?
Yeah, I'd have to dig for it. It's not in the national constitution. It's in the National Officer Selection Handbook. But again, just having been around the process, I can tell you that on the national level, they cut the bottom 50%. The bottom 50% from the region is cut. So if there's 10 candidates from the southern region, after the middle of the nom-com, you're going to have 5 left. But remember, the national process is different from ours too, in the sense of when you talk about caliber of candidate, they're locked in. You have to have one national officer from each region, and then president and secretary are at large. So it's not quite the same dynamic as what we do here.
I see in the chat that someone said, what was the proposing chapter's answer to that not having enough candidates?
As I recall, I don't think they had a solution for that. I don't think they addressed it in their recommendation. So that's why this committee is going to have to think, if that is something you want to do, how would you address it?
I think we also have to remember is that national candidates for national office, that's a much wider scale than just our state. They're not or I'm going to assume they're not going to have the issue of having not enough people running for a national office because it's such a bigger scale. That's 50 states to the one state that, we're trying to decide for.
Yeah, you are correct. I've never heard of them not being able to fill a national officer team.
So instead of basing it off of nationals, what they go off of, what about Mississippi? Because they do the running off the floor through all rounds. Do they have that outlined in their constitution?
I'm not sure. That was the response that their state advisor gave me. I can go dig and see if it's on their website.
In the chat, there has also been a comment that the current state officer team is functioning with 9 officers, and that is correct. We do not have anyone run from Area 1, so we do not have an Area 1 vice president. A typical year would have 10 candidates, but this year we only have 9 to make our team. And we, as far as I know, we haven't seen any difficulties in that manner. We've been able to make up for having that one loss of person.
And the not having the one vice president representing Area 1, this was nothing to do with anything non-com related. There was just not like a single person from Area 1 who ran, just to throw that out there.
Right, and that probably might have had something to do with the whole situation with Corona and not being able to actually be in a state convention. Probably queued some more people just to kind of lay back, and that's why nobody from Area 1 had come by.
And Paige is correct in the chat. She said, but we had more candidates, just not any from Area 1. We did have more than 9 candidates, just not one person was from Area 1.
Yeah, I want to say we had 22 total candidates. However, like as the process went on, there were some people who dropped out. So there were about,
I think we ended up with 15 this year.
yeah. So we had a good amount of people running for state office.
And just as an aside that has nothing to do with this, I was extremely proud of those candidates also. You need to give them a round of applause for volunteering to run for state office during Corona year, knowing full well that this is not a normal year. So kudos to y'all for even having the gumption to do it this year. I was very pleasantly surprised with the number that went through the process. Abby, I think at this point, my advice would be that if there's no other major suggestion, I would go ahead and have the committee vote. Are you going with option 1 or if you're going with option 2? If you're going with option 1, this is pretty easy. The committee just recommends the process stay the same. If you're going to go with option 2, y'all are going to have to come up with some more details to what you want to propose. So I think, and for the advisors on the call, if I'm reading this wrong, let me know. But I think that kind of feels like where you are right now.
Are we gonna do a raise of hand vote and do like each option one at a time? Or do you want to do a poll vote?
Does anyone have an objection to raising a hand? Do you want me to keep this anonymous? I can do it either way. Let me see
I'm
if
not allowed to vote.
No, state officers, you can't vote. That would definitely be a conflict of interest. Let me see if I have a poll set up. We can do a poll on it. All right, so I've got it set up. We'll just do this as a, again, no one had any other idea other than option 1 or 2, correct? If those are the two ideas that you're kicking around, I'm going to pull the poll up. Remember, only delegates can vote. I'll pull the poll up, so I should be looking for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, let me pull the poll up and go ahead and vote. Where did it go? So you're either going to vote option 1 or option 2.
Mr. Cade, I'm just gonna X out of this because it popped up on my screen.
Yeah, just close it.
Okay.
You're not eligible to vote, just close it.
South Lafourche 2 says his or hers still does not work.
It's still not working. Okay. Delegate from South Lafourche, can you just put your vote in the chat, yes or no? I'm sorry, not yes or no, option 2. Okay. All right, is there anyone left to vote? Has everyone voted? So remember, you have to add 1 to option 2 for our delegate from South Lafourche. So that means that option, it's a tie. It's 4 and 4. Well, y'all need to debate a little bit more.
Has anything been hurt by the way that we've been doing it? The way that, as the way we've been doing it, is anything wrong specifically? That's not working, that's not, somebody is having a hard time with it, they don't like it, something like that? Because I've always seen it, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So if it's not necessarily not working, then I don't think we need to go through the whole changing the Constitution, going through all these procedures, just because we don't want the lower 25% running off the floor.
Recently, in the past few years, I know of this situation. I'm not gonna say any names or anything, but a candidate was selected for state secretary by nominating committee. That means that she was in the top, like the second percentile, top 2. That's the second highest position on the team. And she was ran against off the floor, and the other person got that position over her. Now, it's not to say that that person wasn't qualified or neither was she, but she did have that higher position and higher score from non-com. So I would suggest maybe thinking about it as if you were in that position, walking in their shoes. If you were to score a specific ranking, maybe in the top 75%, and someone were to run against you and get that position, do you think that would necessarily be fair, or are you still in agreement to that?
Someone said, well, if I mean nom-com picks somebody, they pick them for a reason. And then if someone runs off the floor and beats them, they were less qualified than nom-com's choice.
But even if we let the top 75% run, it could just be the however many, and then the one person under that, if that made sense. Like, they're still in the top 75%, but they're one below where this person could have been, and they still can run off the floor. And that 1%, how much of a jump is that really? if that made like any sense.
Someone said, keep in mind that students can certainly be trained. They might not look good in non-com, but if they're running at all, it's a certain indicator that they will work hard to improve as they go.
And again, I can agree with that because anybody that's willing to go in front of 15 to even 20 people and give a speech or write for them or show their skills, they should be able to at least run off the floor, have a chance, and do the campaigning, let the students decide.
And you also have to think, whenever candidates are running off the floor, they're not being elected by their qualifications because the delegates do not know that. They're just going and being elected based off popularity and off their speeches. We don't know how qualified they are just by hearing their one 60-second speech.
Are your brains hurting yet? These are difficult conversations, no doubt. Do y'all want to try to find a compromise somewhere? What do y'all want to do?
Someone said, let's vote again.
Yeah,
You want to try it again?
we can try it again. If it's a tie, we can keep going.
All right, let me relaunch it. South Lafourche delegate, just tell me again, do you want option 1 or 2, and we'll add you in. So there were 7 votes last time, 8 with the South Lafourche delegate, so we should be looking for the same thing. All right. Put your votes in again. Is everyone done? All right, so this time you changed your mind. So go back to the document now. Let me pull it back up.
It was a 71% vote to a what? 20.
I can do the math on it.
9. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so with option 2, what if we did if there are 15 or less candidates that there are no cuts, so that there's still going to be a full team, basically.
Yeah, because that would solve the problem of if you don't have enough officers without, because then your top 75%, I'm not even good at math, but that's not going to be a lot of people out of 15. So you wouldn't have a lot of people to run off the floor. So that's where we run into that, if they can still run off the floor, you know.
So is everyone pretty much in agreement with that? 15 or less, no cuts? I mean, there can be more inputs too. I mean,
Do we want to cap it at 15 or should we go, I don't know. I guess 5 extra people wouldn't make a big deal, but.
Okay, you also have to keep in consideration the number of people from each area running. So say there are like a lot of people running from area 3 and 4. yet there aren't many running from 1 and 2. So like you have to keep your like options open to those different areas because of the different positions that they fill, like with the different vice presidents positions and stuff. If that makes sense. If it doesn't, then just completely disregard what I said.
Sydney, you made sense, because if you have a bunch of people running from these other areas but not from the other ones, you're still going to run into that problem of not having the people to fill the positions from the other areas that don't have candidates running.
Are there like a maximum amount of people that can run? Or is that like,
There's no maximum. I remember back in the day, we used to have 50. It was huge. But that was also before we had a formal nom-com process too. The nom-com process has gotten more challenging over the years.
Okay, so is there a way you can limit the number of people from each area that can run?
Okay, so from what I'm taking from this, limiting the number of people running from each area you would basically have to go through a full nom-com just to do that. And I doubt anyone would want to go through a nom-com just to get to state, like from your area, then also having to go through another state nom-com, if that makes sense. And if that was what like your question was, because limiting like Mr. Lejeune said, there's never been a limit. So I think adding a limit now would kind of make it unfair, if that makes sense.
Miss Amy said, many, many years ago when I was elected state president of Area 2 only had 2 candidates. We were elected president and secretary, so there was no Area 2 VP.
Here's a suggestion for you to think of. As I told you earlier, currently, as long as there are 2 candidates from an area, neither of those candidates will be cut, because otherwise you already know who your area VP is going to be. So those 2 candidates would make it all the way through.
So even if one was not qualified whatsoever, they would still let them go all the way through?
Well, there would almost have to be, because otherwise at the cut, the one from the area who's left knows, oh, well, I'm area VP. I mean, that's it. You really disincentivize them to keep trying as the process goes on, knowing that they've got it. If you're going to go with this option 2, I think the only way that it's going to somewhat be workable is if you make a stipulation that says something along the lines of the committee has to leave a maximum of 2 candidates per area through the entire process. I'm sorry, a minimum of 2 candidates through the entire process. Does that make sense?
Okay, so could we do that? Like, that's a possibility, like it'll work, you think?
You can recommend it, but again, anything you propose is going to have to be voted on as an amendment to our bylaws. And so it's going to take a 2/3 vote in order to get it through.
I say having the minimum of the 2 cut per area is a good idea. But what if you still run into the issue where you only have 1 running from each area?
Well, then at that point, I mean, even under the current situation, that candidate would know that they're automatically going to be area VP unless they were moved up to president or secretary. It's really not a lot different than what we do now.
Wouldn't they still be pushed, like they would want to be area, but wouldn't they want to push for either like being the president or the secretary as well, trying to get the highest percentage they can anyway, or no?
Yeah, see, now you're talking about a whole different issue though. If an area just has one candidate, do they just not have an area VP from that area if they move up to president or secretary? That's a different debate that's come up before. I don't know that this committee needs to address or could even solve it.
Yeah, so I agree with the no cuts if there's 2 people from each area. I think that'll be good.
So from what I'm hearing, most of the people that are putting their input in feel that the 2 people not being cut per area is a good idea.
I mean, I feel like you need at least 2. If there's more, then they're all gonna push each other, but you need the 2 to make them try like as hard as they can, not knowing what they're gonna get, you know?
So we have that minimum number, but what is the maximum number of candidates that we can have per area without getting too high, so where we cut too many people that can't end up running off the floor because they didn't go through the entire nominating committee process?
Can you repeat that one more time? I'm trying to.
So we decided that they have a minimum of 2 candidates not be cut per area for a nominating committee, so that they have the 2 that are competing against each other for their positions. But what is the maximum number of candidates that we can have running against each other without having too many people have to go through the entire process? Like, if we have a lot of people running, how many people could we cut without it being too much cut that they can't run off the floor because they didn't complete the entire process?
So that would probably have to do with how many people ran in the first place, though. Because I understand what you're saying. Like, I understood that. But I think it would just depend on the number of people. If you only had 20 people run, there's 2 from that area. Will they go all the way through? So that's already, I don't know, can't do math. A certain percentage of 20. Yeah. At least the parish education, now.
Keep in mind that if you set a number and if that number ends up in the Constitution, then that's what the committee will just have to abide by. I mean, we can adjust the process to fit it. It doesn't have to be dictated. I mean, as delegates, if you're giving the recommendation or the requirement, then that's what we adjust the process to. Currently, right now, if there's less than 15 candidates running, they don't do a cut. Once it gets over 15, they consider it if there's a spread in scores. Now, if you got 17 candidates and they're all within 1 point of each other, they're not going to cut anybody. There's flexibility in that regard. But typically, usually, you start to see a spread in scores through the first half of non-com.
So with this way, could we just leave it like that?
What do you mean leave it like that? As in saying no change, or
No change to like how they do the cuts, because you're gonna, if you have 15 people, if they're so close, like if you have more than 15, if they're so close in points like they do now, just leave them, but keep the 15 that run the same. Like keep that part of it the same.
There's a question that says, remind us of the spread. Do they just cut all below the spread? Typically, if you have more than 15 candidates, they'll look at the 15th place, and it's kind of like how we used to assign bronze, silver, and gold rankings for things. If there's a big gap in points, that's where the committee makes the cut. The committee votes on that cut, by the way. It's not done by one person. It's not done by the committee coordinator. All 13 people on the committee see the points, and they determine if they're going to make a cut at that point. So it's still voted on by students. They just don't see the names of who the candidates are. They're just labeled 1 through however many. The points are put on a screen, and then the committee decides where they want to cut.
So should we just do the minimum of the 2 candidates from each area and then cap it at a certain number? And if they don't meet that certain number, if they don't have that many people run that year, I guess just leave it to the nominating committee to, I guess, tweak themselves and figure it? I don't know. We would just have to pick a certain number to cap it out at. Or not cap the amount of people who run, but cap the amount of people before they.
So what about just keeping it at the 15 with the minimum of 2 candidates from each area?
So to make sure I heard that correctly, you're saying that at the cut, the committee will keep 15 candidates with a minimum of 2 from each area. And,
Yes,
and as the comment said, is the 15 in the Constitution? No, it's not. So this would have to come forward as an amendment to be added to the Constitution to enforce it. So in effect, your committee report would be proposing a constitutional amendment. Is that correct?
yes, sir.
Is there any other wording that y'all are thinking that you want to add, that you want to change?
So for capping it at 15, are we capping it if it does have a spread and if it doesn't, or if we're just cutting it if it does have a spread of scores after the first half of the round?
the way that this is worded, it's just 15, regardless of point spread. If you want to do a point spread, you'll have to recommend that also.
So how many rounds of nominating committee are there?
6.
Okay. So they would have to go through all the nom-com rounds to be eligible. 15.
I'm sorry, let me correct myself. In a normal year, 7. We did 6 this year because we couldn't do writing because of COVID. In a normal round, it would be 7.
Okay.
And the cut is after the first 4 rounds in a normal year. So it would be writing, panel interview, a round robin, and then there's one more.
Not media or facilitation. Oh, no, it is. It's the facilitation workshop round.
So we're not worrying about the top 75% anymore, right? Okay, that's what I was making sure. Because something wasn't adding up, and it's because I still thought that. Anyway.
I think we should do if there is a big spread, because if there's not a spread, then you're not giving everyone the same chance.
I would say we would do it if there is a spread, because if there's not and they're all really close scores, then if they're able to go into the second half, they could end up getting that extra few points they needed to go above one of the people that they're really close to. But they wouldn't have had that chance if we do it and there wasn't a spread and we cut them. They won't have the chance to go and get their scores back if it's close.
Yes, with the current wording, that would, if this were to be put in the Constitution, that means that the top 15 candidates would be allowed to run off of the floor.
But wouldn't the majority of those candidates already be nominating committee's choice, right?
10 of
That
them.
would leave
5 of them.
Yeah.
So 5 could run off the floor. 10 would be nom-com's choice.
Right.
If you had, if every area had a candidate. And also remember too that this proposal is specific to state office. It did not mention area. You're not discussing area nom-com as part of this committee. That's separate. We've got 40 minutes left before Committee 4 is set to meet.
Okay, someone in the chat said, so those 5 would have to be announced along with nom-com choice.
Candidates who make it past the cut already find out. They're given a letter after the first night letting them know that they've moved on. And so anyone who was able to participate in the second round would know that they're part of that additional 5.
Does anybody else have any thoughts about whether we should do it with or without the spread for the cut on the 15 candidates?
I think I liked it how you had worded it with if somebody's really close to somebody else and they just didn't have that chance because they were cut. So I think you said it was with the spread, right? Or without the spread?
They would do the cut if there was a spread in.
Yeah.
You're going to have to determine how to identify what that number is.
Usually by the end of it, after 7 rounds.
Mr. K, what does nom-com do now? I know you said that they do the 15 candidates, so they just make it up, they just do based off of the spread?
Correct. So right now, again, if there's more than 15, that's when the committee will start looking at making a cut. And they'll try to find where the largest point break is after that 15.
But that point break, the way that Berlin does it, is it has to be like more than 100 points.
Yeah, the way that Ms. Dodd has conducted this in years past is that the point break needs to be at least 100 points. If you're over 100 points, that means that you're basically an entire round behind the person in front of you when you look at scores. That's an arbitrary number. That's just what the committee has used in years past. There's no written requirement of that because, again, there's no guideline right now on how the committee has to function as it regards cutting candidates, which is also why they can all run off the floor. If you're hearing noise, it's because my little one is on the couch over there playing. He needs to go back to school. Lord, it's time. So what are y'all thinking?
I would say looking at that 100 point where they would draw the cut, I feel like that would be a pretty good number to start thinking about if there's a spread or not, because that seems like it would be, if that's how it's been working for them, I feel like that number is good and we should stick with that number, but put it into our recommendation.
You'll have to figure out how to reconcile that because you're kind of at a difference. You won't necessarily be able to say a maximum of 15 can move on if a cut is based on, if it's based on a certain point spread, because that point spread may not be between 15 and 16. What if it's between 10 and 11? What if it's between 19 and 20? I mean, you don't necessarily know. Or you could say a certain percentage from the first place person. That might be another way of looking at it too.
Yeah, right.
The problem is I don't have any data for you to show you historically how those numbers break down. This would just be a complete guess at this point for us to do that.
So what if we did the maximum 15 candidates will advance and then cut, I guess, depending on a certain number, but I don't know what that number would be. Thought I was going somewhere with that.
So if the 15 number and like the spread is just kind of what NomCom does without having it in the Constitution, what if we just remove that and left the minimum of 2 candidates from each area must be kept throughout the entire process and let NomCom decide whether or not the spread is large enough to cut or keep?
I think that's what Bailey suggested, right? Just take out the number and just let the committee determine where the point break is.
Because then you don't have to deal with you don't have to stress about the number 15 and just be worried about, okay, well, what 15 do we want? They can just take the natural spread and the scores that they like.
Yeah. So, Mr. Cable, we need to specify, like someone said in the chat, a natural spread, or could we just take that out completely and just leave that one bulletin point, the 2 candidates from each area?
So you're saying just take this out,
Yes, sir. If everyone
move it down so I don't have to leave it yet. So it would just say this.
Yes, sir.
We would have to reword this first line. Just understand that either way, which you're asking to do is to put in the Constitution that some students would not be allowed to run off of the floor. just so that you're clear on it. The way that I see your two options right now, if you go at the 15, you're giving a definite number so everybody knows I've got to be in the top 15. If you go with this one, you're giving more latitude to the committee based on what they're actually seeing in the committee. So there's pros and cons to both of them. To the question, is that how it's done, keeping it as is? I think the difference is, though, that what this is going to recommend is that after the cut, those candidates who are cut can't run off of the floor.
Yeah. You would still have to go through the whole nom-com process. And if you didn't go through the whole process, then you cannot run off the floor.
So this option says that at most there would be 15 candidates. This option says there could be more than 15, could be less than 15, but only that number can run, either as nom-com's choice or be running off the floor.
Right, because if we capped it at 15, you might not get two candidates from each, just a whim, you might not get two candidates from each area out of that 15. So if we cut the whole number 15 anyway, we'd have a better chance of having two candidates from each area throughout the entire process. Two more eligible candidates, so you know.
If we decide to drop the 15 maximum number, then it'll give the nominating committee more leeway, and they can go based off their training and what they have actually witnessed in these state officer candidates to find out which ones they should cut and which ones should be kept based on what they've seen, so they don't have to stress about picking that exact number, because there could be some that they think are worth it but might have to stop it because of the number.
Yeah, I agree. And if they see that there's a big spread, then they can, put however many people in need based off of that spread. Or if there's not, keep however many people they need based off the scores.
Yeah, you do need to vote on whether or not you want to get rid of this one. So instead of making it a negative vote, let's do it this way. I'll set the poll up. You're going to either vote for a maximum of 15 or you're voting against a maximum of 15. Let me get it set up.
This is just a reminder that we have only about 30 minutes left of this meeting. So whatever ideas and all that good stuff we have, we need to kind of like say it now in this meeting.
Oh, hold on, not that one. Wrong one. All right, so the question is going to say, do you agree to cap the number of state officer candidates at 15 after the first round? So if you want that, that's what we're discussing. If not, you don't want to include that in the report. Should be 2 more votes, I believe. And then our delegate from South Lafourche, he says no. Should be 1 more vote. All right, so the noes have it. So we're going to strike out that provision for capping it at 15. There's the result plus one more no. All right, so this one is gone. Okay, so is there any other provision you want to add? I know you were talking about Point Break. What are your thoughts?
Should we just go ahead and vote on the report? Since I think we discussed it all whenever we were doing the first. After we realized we were doing option 2, I think we did our discussion. So I don't really see anything else unless we had to reword it, but
Yeah, we do need to reword it to make it understandable. So tell me how do you want it to be presented to the delegates on Tuesday, and then we need to vote on it one more time. Let's do it this way.
as long as a minimum of 2 candidates from each area are kept.
Yeah, we'll keep that as the bullet. Is that worded correctly?
Yes, sir. I think so.
So Abby, what you need to do now, that this is, and that's fine, it's a short and sweet report, it's pretty to the point. You need to have a delegate move this as a motion, get a second, and you have one more opportunity to debate the report, and then we need to take a vote on it.
Would anyone like to make the motion?
I'll do it. I move that candidates eligible to run from the floor for state office must participate in the whole process to be eligible. A minimum of 2 candidates from each area must be kept through the entire.
Lincoln, what's your last name?
Fletcher. It's IN.
I am.
Yeah, sorry.
All right. Who's seconded it?
Is there a second?
Anybody?
Does anybody want to second this motion?
I'll second the motion.
What's your name?
Gabrielle Wolf.
All right. Abby, they get one more opportunity to debate this.
The floor is now open for discussion.
So let's do this, Abby. They're ready to vote. Those of you who are eligible to vote, just have them vote with their raise hand feature. All in favor, raise. All opposed, raise. Just do it that way and I'll count them.
Okay. All in favor of the motion, raise your hand on the raise your hand feature.
I see 6, right? 7.
Yeah.
All right, is that it? 7. Then put your hands down. Oh, there's Carly, that's 8. All right, Abby, you can ask if there's any.
Is there anyone opposing this motion? Please raise your hand.
All right, I think that's it, Abby. It was 8-0.
The ayes have it, motion carries.
So here's your procedure. On Tuesday at 9 in the morning, we'll have the statewide delegate meeting. So this committee and the other 3 will be brought up for final debate on the state level and then vote. You're also going to be voting on state dues for the upcoming school year. We're recommending to keep them the same as last year. You're going to officially approve degrees, and you're going to hear the POA and audit committee report. So we'll do all of that at 9 a.m. on Tuesday of next week. We'll be on the same link as we are right now. All right. That's all I've got, Abby. Thank y'all.
Mr. Lejeune,
Yes, ma'am.
this is just a question for you. If y'all want to go, y'all can. But okay, so I took notes like the whole time. Like after everything everyone said, I took a note as to what they said. So I'm trying to see what Megan did, but I don't know who.
I can share it with you.
Okay, because it said like the Basel delegate proposed an aid for students with special needs. Like I don't remember what delegate did what, if that makes sense.
That's okay, because remember, this is all recorded too. Do you want me to share Megan's with you?
I have hers right here. Like I'm trying to go off what she's like said.
Yeah, I'm going to post these videos up after today is over, so if you want to go back and watch it again, you can. But as long as there's some record of it, that'll be okay. Plus, like I said, it's recorded, and if anybody really wants to see, they can go back and watch it.
Okay. So it has to be accurate. Like I can't just say some random delegate did it.
No, don't do that.
Oh, okay. I'll go back and watch it.
You all right, Abby?
Yeah, Mr. Lejeune, what am I going to be doing anything at the meeting on Tuesday?
Yeah, I'm going to have this report typed up. As y'all approve it, you'll just read it.
Okay.
I'll pull it up on the screen and you'll read it. And then you'll have to say, I move that it be accepted as read, and then we'll vote on it from there.
Okay.
Not bad. Y'all did a good job. I know it's a little odd doing it through Zoom.
Oh my gosh, I can't even think to type this.
Sydney, it's all right. You don't have to go back and type it all.
I'll watch this video tonight and type this. Okay.
All right. I'm going to log off for a second. Thank you, Nathan.